So my name is Wayne. I run an organization called the Global Growth Institute, and we work with organizations all around the world, building and strengthening management and leadership capability, quality, depends how you put it. And what I wanted to do for our session this morning is two things really. One is to share with you what we've learned on our journey from interacting with, learning from lots and lots of different leaders around the world. And secondly, and maybe more importantly, is to share with you something that I think is going to be super practical and useful for you and for your teams. So I'm going to share with you some of our data. Some of it is brand new, not that we just put it together yesterday, but it's brand new for 2025. So we've surveyed 15,500 managers that are part of our community. So I wanted to share something which is brand new and fresh with you in the hope that it could be of ultimate value for you personally and for the teams of people that I'm sure you manage as well. So just as a read before we get into this, how many of you manage teams of people? Okay. So those without your hands up are the clever ones, right? You figured this out. And how many of you manage other people who manage other people? Okay, great. So this should be hyper useful for many of you for today as well. So I guess we'll start with the title. When we focus on this of how do we build leadership and management capability at scale and rapidly was a big focus for us and part of what we've been working on for the last, I'd say, 15 years in particular. I began as an economist. I went to work for Deloitte after leaving university. I spent about 11 years in professional service firms in Deloitte and BDO. And then I went to run the consulting arm of the Sunday Times Best Companies to Work For business. So my day job was giving feedback to CEOs all around the world about how their staff felt about them. So in some days you can imagine this was really good. You know, I'm here to see you as a CEO and say, hello, I've just surveyed 10,000 of your staff and they love you. And the CEO would say, oh, I like this guy, good guy. I like this. Or I've just surveyed 10,000 of your staff and they think you suck. Don't like this guy, bad survey, silly questions, next please. And then we'd have an argument of some description. And I did that for about 5 years. And part of what I found out on that journey was nearly every single one of the CEOs and leaders we came across kept talking about they wanted great managers. And the terminology was, we want world-class managers. And I used to sit there on that other side of the table and say, well, that makes sense. Who doesn't want a world-class manager? And then about 14 years ago, we started to think, well, I like simple questions. What is a world-class manager? So interestingly, with Naomi here from New Zealand, our research began in Wellington many years ago. And we started in Wellington, went to Sydney, and we sort of continued through to Ho Chi Minh City, and then through and through and through to Brazil, then through to Canada, interviewing CEOs, HR directors, and managers in organizations, and finding out, asking a very simple question, which in your opinion, what does a great manager do? And if you think back in your career journey, think back to maybe the beginning, and think back to what it feels like working with a great or perhaps a not so great manager. You know, we understand that the connection with your line manager probably has more impact on your performance and on your enjoyment of the organization more than anything else in the company. Often, as we say, we're attracted by brands. You know, I left university, I don't know what Deloitte is like. Looks good to me, it's got a good brand. I'm sure it'll be good for me if I work there. I'm pulled by the brand and I'm often then repelled by an individual. So we know that people join organizations, they tend to leave managers. Why? Well, because the manager relationship is everything. And then what we'd found out, and if you like the numbers, we started to look a bit closer at organizations that had great or not so great management. And did it also turn out that those organizations performed really well? So we took 37 companies who are listed on the stock exchange, where we were measuring the overall employee feedback cycle and feedback score. And we looked at those 37 companies and we said, well, if you invested, let's say $100 5 years ago in those companies, what would the $100 be worth versus if you'd invested the $100 in, let's say, an all, I don't know, NASDAQ share fund or a FTSE share fund over those 5 years. So the headline was, if you invested $100 in the stock market over a 5-year period between 2009 to 2014, when we looked at the data, your $100 would have returned about $120. So not bad, probably not as good as Bitcoin or whatever, but not bad. If you would have taken the same $100 and invested it in the companies that we knew had strong levels of management feedback, the $100 would have been worth $452 in the same time period. Now, obviously, I'm no sort of financial advisor, so I'm not allowed by the FCA rules to give any sort of financial advice. if I was a financial advisor, I'd tell you it'd probably be a good idea if you like investing money to measure the management scores of organizations. It tells you quite a lot about the long-term predictability of the success of that company, or performance is probably a better word. And of course, we're not naive enough to believe it's just management is the input, but we know it has a huge impact on everything else. So what I wanted to do was to share with you some of what we found, some of what we're unpacking constantly about what this looks like. We took our insights and then sort of packed them into a program called World Class Manager. And actually, I'm delighted because our business partner from Mongolia is here. Dava is here. So it's so ironic that actually Dava and I have been working together for maybe 7-8 years. I've been to Mongolia a couple of times, and then Dava and I met earlier this year in Oxford, and she's the reason I'm back in Oxford again. So via Naomi. So thank you so much. But it's a lovely thing to be back in the room with Dava. And we work sort of with all these different places, and where we crushed all of the insights and knowledge and built a program of it. It then turned into a book form, which I think is going to be in Mongolian too. It's now in Arabic. It's a great gift for Christmas. It's a great read. No one will not like you for buying this, I'll tell you what. So actually the big thing for us was, how do we take all of our insights and make them like super portable and package them in a way that anyone can access? And that's a huge part of our ethos of what we've been up to. And we're very fortunate to work with some exceptional organizations from the UN through to HSBC, the BBC we do lots of work with, UCL. We work also with Oxford University, and lots of organizations that are ultimately focused and that have a scale problem. So if you think about it, you know, if I've got a small organization, I have 15 people in my immediate team. So my business is nice and sensible size. I can get my arms around it. I've got like 1.5 people who play a management role. So it's kind of easy for me. If you're an organization where you've got thousands and thousands of managers, and you've probably got a staff churn figure of between 10 to 20%, it's a very difficult, if not impossible task to get the level of management trained to the level that you probably want at scale. You compound that even bigger across an economy, which Emma mentioned, which is why we're working with the Egyptian government, and the problem becomes even bigger. So this was last week, actually today, last Tuesday, I was in Cairo there with the financial regulator of Egypt, and we've launched our program across the country. Really, the idea is super simple, is that we know across the Egyptian economy, there are probably around 30,000 people who work in the insurance sector. If you're the Egyptian government, I would imagine you probably look at the insurance sector as an exciting one, because it's something that you could export to other countries across the continent and the region. What you probably want to do is make that sector stronger, and you probably want to build the management capability of that sector. So just like any economy, if you pick the sectors that you think are doing really well and you want to strengthen them, this is exactly the same principle, really, that a company thinks about when it knows that it's got a strong potential of growth in an area, and why not strengthen that particular part of the organization. So when we talk about building leadership and management capability, we've done a lot of work to try and unpick and understand what that actually is. According to what we found, initially we found 12 things. I know it sounds kind of neat and perfect, but we found 12 things that we felt, not as a perfect science, but about 80 to 90% of most of what we found with great managers is predictable, it's repeatable, it's trainable, it's sensible, it's straightforward stuff. It's the sort of stuff that you look at and you think, and as people often say to us, well, this is not rocket science, Wayne. I say, you're correct, this is really easy, so why don't you do it? It's not the fact that it's not difficult, but it's often hard and often to do it. So what we look at and what we found is the sort of the rigor and the principles in action that we learn from. I'm always fascinated by sort of two different, I wouldn't say sides of the spectrum, but in a way, like from the people who manage really small teams to the billionaires that we've come across. And we did some work a few years ago, and I called it for social media because it works really well. I called it Billionaire Secrets, Billionaire Secrets. Everyone loves Billionaire Secrets. And I interviewed 6 billionaires, UK pound billionaires, right? So Egyptian pound billionaires is still pretty cool, but UK pound billionaires even cooler. So we interviewed 6 billionaires to try and find out what it was that they did that made them successful. And I wasn't necessarily interested in the money. It's more that these individuals had made their wealth from scratch. And if you're going to make become your net worth 2 to 3 billion pounds, some of them from nothing in your lifetime, it's quite a difficult thing to achieve. It's like sort of meeting a Usain Bolt kind of person. How do you do that? And how did you become that successful? And there was 2 things that we learned through the interviews, many things actually, but 2 things that I thought were useful to share with you. One was that the 6 of them that I met, who all made their wealth from nothing, exhibited 2 very interesting behaviors. One was that they were unbelievably crystal clear about what it was that they wanted. So we often say that human beings, we're really hard workers, but we're often really bad askers. We're very bad at being clear about what it is that we actually want. My mother is 71 and says to me she doesn't know what she wants to do when she grows up. So we laugh about it, right? But it's not easy to be clear about what it is that we want. So the first thing was they were very, very clear about what it was that they wanted. And interestingly, I didn't find that they worked harder than other people. I wouldn't necessarily say their IQs were higher than other people. So what was it that made them so unbelievably successful? And I think it was the second thing. So A, that they were very clear about what they wanted, and B, they were exceptionally good at being able to enthuse other people to be as excited as they were about the thing that they were excited about. Sounds like a riddle. I don't know if I could say it again, it just worked once, we'll leave it there. But that's what I found with them. So I met a guy who was in the cabling business, who'd made billions of pounds in the cabling business, undersea cables that go into your sort of TV and stuff. And when I left that guy that day, if you would have met me that afternoon, you would have met a cable enthusiast. Right? So I sort of go home, I'm behind the TV saying, oh my God, look at you. Because I was so hyped up about cabling, because it was infectious. And what happened with this particular guy, this is not meant to be part of this presentation, but we've gone off on a tangent. But when I sat with this guy, we had an hour together because he wanted some advice on something to do with his company. So he's very clever, he's sharp, 5 minutes, he got it. And I thought, we're going to be done in a few minutes because, he's got what he needed. And then we spent another 50 minutes together. And interestingly, the other 50 minutes were all about my life. He was asking me questions about what's Wayne like and about my kids and my family and what we like to do and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, why? I sort of watched him walk away. We met near his house in West London. I watched him walk away and I thought, why would he do that? Why would a guy who's so busy spend 50 minutes finding out about a person that he's probably not going to meet again? I mean, this wasn't meant to be the beginning of a beautiful relationship. This was like a one lunch stand, So as I sort of saw him walk away, I thought, why would he do that? And then I realized, of course, the reason why he's so successful is because he's like addicted to finding out what makes you tick. Because if he can find out what makes you tick, he's going to have a better shot at helping you to get excited about the thing that he wants you to be excited about, which is selling cables, I suspect, or making cables. So, when we found out these things, we realized that there are some quite common principles at play. Much of them are repeatable, are learnable, are teachable, are shareable. So I wanted to try and bring that to life as much as I could. Before we get into this, I've got two challenges that we like to talk about because I think that these are challenges regardless of wherever you are in the planet. Our business is split across from the UK to Europe to Africa, South America, everywhere pretty much where we work. And we would find that this sort of challenge exists everywhere. And this is the challenge of the lack of attention. So according to some of the research, how long do you think the attention span of a goldfish is?
3 seconds.
7 is closer. 3 is a bit pessimistic. Give them a chance. Apparently, a goldfish is about 9 seconds attention span, 8 to 9 seconds. How you measure it, I don't know, but they figure that this is about right. Probably someone at Oxford figured this out, right? But they now say that they think the human being attention span is about a second less than a goldfish. So this is like everywhere we go, we recognize this as an issue. And not least because if you imagine now, as you do, you run teams in your organizations. Let's say you develop the most compelling strategy you've ever developed. You love it. You're high-fiving your fellow leaders. Your investors love it. The board love it. Your leadership team love it. And then you go out to talk to the people with your new message of the strategy and future of the organization. And as you do so, I'm there about to receive your golden, beautiful message. And I'm like this. Sorry, what? Oh my God, Justin Bieber's got some new trainers. Oh my God, OMG, LOL. Sorry, what? What's that? So we know that the attention span of people across every organization, so all of your messaging, all of your strategy, all of the goals and objectives are in competition with the information and the attraction of everything that's coming from outside into people's phones. We understand this. So now what it does is, are we going to be able to stop that? No. Are we going to be able to change people's attention spans? Definitely not. But what it does make us rethink, is it makes us rethink how do we engage and communicate with different audiences in a new way, because we have to accept that everything's changed. We have to accept that we must engage differently. So how might we do that? We met some of the guys at UCL that we work with in neuroengineering, and I was asking some of these very clever people, about the attention span of people. Is it true that it's actually getting shorter? They would argue it's not getting shorter because that would take, thousands of years of human evolution, I suspect. But what definitely is the case is the competition for your attention span is getting more ferocious. So therefore, there's much more, and these messages are really attractive, of course. I shared with a company that we work with in the UK, I won't say who because I'm being recorded, but they're a stock market listed company, that's why I won't share who they were, but you can probably find out now, but their market valuation is £1.2 billion, and it took them 40 years to get to a market valuation of £1.2 billion. I shared with them a story about a crypto called Pepe coin. I don't know if any of you are into cryptocurrencies, but there's a cryptocurrency called Pepe coin, which in 7 days went from zero market valuation to £1.2 billion. And they look really upset. Because I see you guys have been at this for 40 years. These guys did this in 7 days. Like, you're slow, what's up with you? And we were talking about the idea that, of course, Pepe coin is because it's the attention. It's the attention that gives the value. So we're in a world where attention is tremendously valuable, of course. And therefore, if we think about the attention of our people, does it help us to rethink how valuable that attention might be? So a thought to sort of place with you as we go through this. Second thing is about the lack of time problem. So nearly every organization that we worked with everywhere around the world tells us that there's a lack of time problem in the organization. The strange thing about the lack of time problem is organizations and leaders often present it like it's a new thing. Yeah, we've got this time issue now. Oh my God, it's crazy here. So, okay. So was there a time before in the past when you had tons of time? No. Will there be a time in the future where you have loads of time? We hope so. No, there's not going to be because there's always no time. And interestingly, we found this article, which is called Who's Got the Monkey? It's the second most downloaded article ever in Harvard Business Review. And has anyone read the article? It's quite interesting. So it talks about things and people in the organization that ultimately steal your time, right? So a couple of them that it points out. So one is what it calls boss imposed time. So boss imposed time is when boss comes in on a Monday and says, I've got an idea. And everyone says, oh my God. Over the weekend, my daughter was in Starbucks with her friend and they had this fantastic idea. So what I think we're going to do is, and everyone says, this is a bad idea, but no one challenges the idea, of course, because that's suicide. And therefore we go with it and boss imposed time. Often, I'm being sort of over the top, but you know how this works. Second one, it calls what it calls system imposed time. So that's, we operate and do things in a certain way that we know are kind of ineffective, but we've just done them that way for 10 years. So why change? It calls subordinate imposed time. So with people in your teams, as I've got people in my team, sometimes, and I'm definitely guilty of this, I'll think to myself, it's easier if I just do it myself. Should I take half an hour to explain this to someone? I'll just get on with it. It'll take me 5 minutes to do it. And actually what happens is you compound that as a problem and you have no time. So it sets out about 4 or 5 things that ultimately steal your time. And I like the analogy. It sort of talks about where it says, you begin the week. Let's say you're going to work for 40 hours and you've got a bag of candy with 40 pieces of candy that represent every hour you're going to work that week. And you're minding your own business, walking down the corridor, and then somewhere out from nowhere, someone comes over your shoulder and just takes 3 of them. I'm going to invite you to this steering committee meeting. You're like, oh man, yeah. And you're going to come every month forever. Oh no, but you can't say no because it's suicide to say no. So, we know that the organization often steals time and it's something that we really need to be careful about. And it's one of the big issues that we came across everywhere. We met a guy called Jim Collins who wrote a very famous business book called Good to Great. And one of the things Jim Collins said in his sort of story, which we loved, was how do you try and get some of the time back, which is not technically possible, of course, but, to create a time saving perhaps. And one of the things some guy in the audience asked him, said, Jim, great idea. I love the fact that most CEOs would spend half a day to a day a week doing nothing other than thinking consciously about what was going on in the company. But I don't have half a day or a day a week to spend that time. So Jim Collins asked this guy, he says, right, could you go on holiday in late September? And this guy says, no. He says, why not? He said, well, because my diary is very busy. He said, okay, could you go on holiday in January? He says, yes. He says, why? Well, because my diary looks less busy in January. He said, okay, 1st of January, put in half a day a week and keep that time sacrosanct as if it was going to the gym or the doctors or a school play or something. And you keep that time sacred and you reinvest that time, of course, in something value adding. So simple, so easy. And we're all of us sitting there, we're like, oh, of course, because you try and solve the lack of time problem always in the moment, but it's never solvable because you're always so busy. So the time problem is something that we encountered everywhere. And the reason why we think these 2 challenges of attention and the lack of time is they're like constant replay stories, always rotating in the minds of people, and they're the buffer and the challenge that your message immediately hits when it gets transmitted. The first filter it goes through is, I don't know how I'm going to spend the time on this, and that's even if I've given it enough attention, because Justin Bieber's just got some new cool trainers and a cat just fell off a roof, and that's really funny. So anyway, so when we look at this, there are 5 things I wanted to share with you based on our data. And as I said, in terms of what I think would give you, if you're in the process of driving any change, this is not something that I think you need to debate with anyone else. You don't need to bring in a consultant. These are really straightforward, and I think you can take action immediately based on the 5 things and stats that I wanted to share with you. So the first one is when we talk about strategy. Now, the goal of strategy in most organizations, hopefully, is to try and get the organization from somewhere to somewhere else. A better place than the start place, hopefully. That's a good strategy, right? You want to get to somewhere better. The goal and the challenge is that we want to get everyone in the organization to understand it. And this was like one of the most obvious and simple realizations that I had in nearly every organization we went into. And my observation was, and I like simple observations, was I would go into a leadership team, and let's say you are the leadership team, you are the top 60, 70 people in the company. Emma is the CEO. Right? Emma's CEO. Nearly there. So I would come in to see the CEO and the leadership team, and you guys are like so excited about your strategy. You love it. You're high-fiving each other. You've had 2 days in a nice hotel somewhere off-site, figuring it out with some flip charts and good coffee, and you've reached consensus that this is it. You love it. The challenge is, how do you get that sort of excitement from you to everybody else in the organization? The reason why you often understand it better than anybody else is because you had the luxury of 2 days to sit, debate, conversate, agree, disagree, play some golf, have some drinks, have some dinner, whatever you did, and you emerge after 2 days with a shared consensus of what all this means, and it means something to me personally. You have a personal, selfish connection to it. The challenge is, for most people in most organizations, they don't have that connection to it. At best, what they get is someone on a video sort of dictating what it should be, usually with a plant behind them. Notice there's always a plant behind the guy in the video. And then what happens is that's kind of impossible to share through any organization. What we realized was the simple reason why most leadership teams understand it really well is because they had an opportunity to actually talk it through. And would it be normal that you would find somebody else in the organization and just talk it through? So what's your name? Esra. So you don't have to do anything, Esra. But imagine we work in the same building. We don't know each other, but I'm walking down the corridor now. I've just heard the gospel from the leadership team of the new strategy. I love it. So I'm walking down the corridor and I say, "Hi, Esra. We've not met yet, but do you fancy getting a sandwich for lunch and talking about what our strategy means for our teams?" You may say yes. I don't know. But most people will probably say, "You're weird. Leave me alone. I'll get an injunction on you. No, thank you very much." This is like a weird conversation to have with somebody else in the organization, but it's the exact conversation that we as leaders spend 2 days talking with each other about. And it's the reason why we talk about it, which is why we understand it so well. So in our research, and this is again based on 15,000, unless you've got like Spider-Man vision, you're not going to read that, but 15,500 people this year that we've surveyed in our program, and we've had 250,000 managers go through it. We found that 42% of managers in the organizations do not know what the goal is. No clue. So again, when you think about your management community, and you can marry this against what you think it probably looks like in your own organization, maybe you're sitting there and you say, we do much better on this, like everyone understands it, in which case, great. For most organizations, and I would say most because of the organizations we work with, they're generally pretty good companies. Like, lousy companies don't come to us and say, "We want to develop managers," Wayne. It tends not to be the case. They're generally pretty good companies, right? So even in those good companies, only 42% do not know what the goal of the organization is. How do we solve that? Well, we think it's super simple. We've conducted a number of experiments and tests with this, and you can definitely solve it really easy. And I would suggest it should cost you £0, $0, €0, right? Because this should be done internally using your own messaging and using your own managers. I don't think you should bring in someone outside to solve this problem. And lots of companies do and kind of don't, and then figure out it's not worked. So I think the way you solve this is you've got to get people to have a very simple conversation about 3 things. What does the strategy mean for our organization? It's like sort of saying, I'm really interested in what's going on in the world. That's fascinating. Let's watch some CNN or some BBC News. I'm more interested in what's going on in my town, because that's kind of closer to home. I'm like really interested in what's going on in my house. Like last night in my house, my daughters said they want to put on the heating. I said, no, it doesn't go on until the 1st of November in England. But they put the heating on last night. It's frustrating. But I'm more interested in what's going on in my house, right? So again, when we pull the strategy closer and closer, what we did, so when I left Deloitte, I went to another accountancy firm called BDO, and we had a big success with our employee feedback. We jumped up the Sunday Times list from the bottom 10 to the top 20 in 1 year. How we did that was my job was head of employee engagement, so working with our boss, the managing partner, we got about 3,000 people to sit in small groups across the company within a week of time period. We did it in September, ironically. And we got everybody in the company to sit and have a conversation about 3 key questions. What does the strategy mean to our company? Interesting. What does it mean for our team or department? More interesting. What does it mean for me? More interesting than all of that. And then what we ask each individual to do is to plan out the next 6 months of development based on that conversation. So the dream is, of course, if you run a team, as I run a team, the dream is that we want this real alignment between what we think is the right sort of approach and strategy and what that means to everybody else. And the test often is, we ask CEOs to go around the company and pick out people at random in a nice way and ask them to explain, what the strategy is. And I've done this in leadership teams of like 6 people, and you say to them, like, here's a blank piece of paper. I'd like you to write down what you think our sort of next 3-year plan is. And you have 6 very different versions of what the strategy is. And they all told you before, no, we're very aligned. No, you're not, because you probably don't spend enough time talking about it. So we know that managers need help predominantly. And how do you help them? The practical action is you've got to give them an opportunity to actually just talk it through and figure out what it means. Maybe after half an hour of discussing this, I start to figure out it doesn't mean anything to me. There's nothing here for me. Great result. Maybe you want to go somewhere else and take your talent somewhere else. But it's important that we give managers the chance to do that. The second big one, and this was something that for me, everywhere we went, every organization, pretty much everywhere around the world will tell us that communications is the thing. This is the problem, Wayne, when we go into the company. Communications is what we need to fix. And you'll find organizations that will then build massive internal communication teams, put more and more people. We work with a global bank. Here's the irony of this. They did an audit to find out how many people they had working in communications. I thought there was a wonderful irony in that. Turns out there were 700 people who work in communications. So imagine the cross-wiring, like messages everywhere, total mess. So we know that this is not about beefing up internal communications teams. That doesn't solve the problem. And the reason why I'm sure it doesn't solve the problem is because when I was involved with the Sunday Times, we were measuring lots of companies. And we found a company up in Scotland, a place called Irving, which is a social housing organisation. So a small town called Irving outside of Glasgow in the west of Scotland. And they had the highest ever score we'd ever seen of any company we'd ever measured. So I was sort of fascinated by how they did it. I spoke to the CEO and he said to me, Wayne, would you come up to Irving and share with us what we can do to be better? So I'm looking through their employee feedback and it looks like, it's like a cult. I'm reading it thinking like, there's nothing I can tell you that's going to be better than what you're doing. Everything is exceptional. And he said to me, no, you must understand, we also have some communication problems. And it was like this sort of liberation moment. I thought, this is fantastic. Not that he's got problems, but of course, the best organization we'd ever found, based on surveying and analyzing maybe 4,000 companies, has told us that they've got the same problem that like the worst companies got, which is a communication problem. And the reason why I was so excited was because my realization, as simple as it sounds, was that communications is 100% subjective. What you believe is improved communications, I might disagree with. Esra might say this has got better, I might say it's got worse. We could work in the same team, receiving the same messages at the same day, at the same point, using the same channel, right? So when we think about communications, it's 100% subjective, and which is why we focus on, we've got to deliver on everybody's preferences. So again, if you've got 5 people in your team, and there are 3 super simple questions as part of the super simple toolkit here this morning, which is, the questions we believe are really important to ask are, what would you like to know about? How often? And how can I get that information to you? Super simple. What do you want to know about? How often? How can I get the information to you? If you deliver on those 3 things and then go to someone 2 weeks later and say, do you think communications is getting better? What are they going to say? Absolutely, yes. Why? Because their personal preferences for what they think is improved communications have now been met. Problem is, most organizations cannot deliver on individual preferences. The only person who stands a chance of doing that is the line manager or the leader who has a connection to the people. Then what we did is we looked at the managers and said, right, okay, if we know this to be true, based on what we found, what percentage of managers actually check in terms of the quality of their communication? Do you think that would be high or do you think that would be low? What percentage of managers check to see how good they are at how they communicate?
10% less.
Yeah, it's spot on. So it's pretty low. So 85% of managers do not seek feedback. If we ask most managers, how do you feel that you are when it comes to communication? I'm pretty good. What about your manager? Oh, they're lousy. Yeah, but you're good. Yeah, I'm pretty good. And then we'll go to their team and say, what are they like? And they say, they're lousy. I say, okay. So, when we know that, like, we're not trying to search for the sort of the bad person here, but we definitely know that managers don't check and think about their communication style because they often think it works pretty well for them. So again, how do you solve this? Super practical, 3 questions. What do the team want to know about? How often? How can I get it to them? And this is what we would call like a communications audit, but you're conducting this at the team and at the individual level. Area number 3 is what we talk about with growth. Now, when we talk about growth, not really economic growth, we're talking about personal growth, organizational, departmental, project-based growth, depends how you look at it. But we know, based on everything that we found, again, looking at the manager angle, that this has got everything to do with the quality and frequency of one-to-ones in the organization. I'll share with you a bit of a brief case study at the end of an organization who I think gets this really right. But we know that this is a huge one for us. And we found that managers are really fearful, increasingly, of giving not just feedback. This is 47% of managers say they're fearful of giving any feedback. So again, if you were like a drone in the room or a fly on the wall observing most managers' conversations, they're quite interesting of how they go based on what we find out from people. People tend not to like getting involved in anything that's regarded as a difficult conversation for all sorts of reasons. You could be in an environment certainly more like where you've got arguably the UK or the US, where you are nervous about saying the wrong thing because something negative could happen. You could be reported or HR or something could be involved. So people are very wary anyway, but we know that people are fearful of giving feedback. Interestingly, the one area when we drilled into this to find out what is it specifically that you really are worried about, it's giving feedback on behavior because it's so subjective. So that often is, if you really want to get into a quick argument with someone, give them like really dodgy feedback on their behavior. That will surefire. If you want to create an argument today, do that. We know this is really hard to get into and out of, and it's the one thing in a way, like, who gives you guidance on it? When I became a manager, when I was at Deloitte, my boss, who's a great guy, I saw him walking down the corridor and he had like a bottle of champagne behind his back. So I thought, this could be good. And he I'm like 26 years old. He presents me with a bottle of champagne and says, congratulations, you're going to be promoted to manager as of Monday. So I'm like, I don't know, I felt like in that moment I should make a speech. I like to thank my parents. I thank God. So we're having this sort of moment, and then that was it. Preparation done. Good luck, Wayne. See you on Monday. So I spent the weekend freaking out, thinking, what do I do? Do I buy like a better suit? I don't know. On the Monday morning, I got to go to the first ever meeting that I was allowed to go to because I'm now in the management team. And I remember at the end of the meeting, the sort of departmental leader looked at me because I'm the new guy in the room and said, make sure you cascade this to your teams. And I remember sitting there and I was like, and I'm thinking, what does he mean? Like, what does a cascade mean? Or do I do it in interpretive dance? Do I bring this to life through fire? I don't know. Now, this is like a weird thing, but no one had explained what a cascade means. So again, you sort of go through, as I'm sure we've all probably done, and we figure it out, right? But this is an area where I think reality's changed, the world's changed. I think we do need to pay much more attention to how we help managers and prepare them. As a solution to this, and here's my solution, which again, I think should cost you like $0, is in every organization we come across, we recognize that there are always people who are much better at doing these things than other people. Not because they're better human beings, but because they figured out a way, or because they've got maybe the personality or the upbringing or whatever they went through in their formative years. My wife is a psychologist, by the way. So when I talk about formative years, so imagine my life. My wife's a psychologist, and I've got 2 daughters who are like trainee psychologists. So I'm going to be here all day and all night as well. So we know that this is a challenge when we think about how do we prepare people for this and how our managers prepared? And often they're not prepared very, very well at all. And I don't know if you've been through this experience, but going from Friday being a member of my team that I was working in to now being promoted on the Monday, and my team said to one of the guys in my team said to me on the Monday, "Oh, come on then, Wayne, manage us." This is like horrible if you've ever been through this. It's much easier to go somewhere else and appear as the manager rather than to become one over the weekend. And again, with zero prep, zero help. And I think managers really could do with this. So what I would suggest is you identify, because I'm sure everyone's got one, you've probably got someone in your team or organization, or it could be you, where you are much better at doing this stuff than other people. And find out how do those people do it. And I think it's much more valuable to learn from your own internal best practice than it is, as much as an outsider like me can share stuff with you, anyone that you've got internally who's already figured out how to do this is really valuable. And that's ultimately what we're doing globally with our approach, is we're working out who's really good at doing these things. There's no science to this in a way, like what are they actually doing? What can we learn and what can we replicate? I would advise you to do exactly the same in your own organization. And I would suspect, based on everything that we found, that you've probably got anywhere between 5 to 10%, it sounds like very pessimistic, right? 5 to 10% of any population who are going to be really good at doing something and figure out what it is that they do. So a quick side story. So it's another bank. I'll try and keep it real nondescript. It's hard when you've got two cameras. So it's another bank. And I asked the CEO says to me that he's going to have the top 100 in the room together. These are the top 100 future leaders as identified by the HR system as the shiniest, best people they've got. If you've ever watched like The Apprentice show on TV, it's like 100 of them in a room, right? The suits are sharp. The perfume and the aftershave is thick in the air. Smells like success, right? So you go in and I've got these 100 people in there. And then I asked the CEO, I said, could we play a little bit of a game? And the game is, I want to figure out with you, if you're up for doing this, how many of these 100 are truly up for helping you to deliver on the strategy of this organization. So what we did is we wrote a very simple card, and the card had 2 questions on it. Now you've heard the strategy from the CEO. First question, what one thing can you do to make an impact on this? And second question, how are you going to make it happen? So it wasn't good enough to just say something like, I don't know, we need to improve communications, or like, so what? But what do you think you can do and how are you going to do it? At the end of the session, we asked 100 people to put the card in a box. I get excited at the end of the session, I empty the box, and of the 100 best people that we could find, and this is 100 people out of 38,000 people, right? So this is like the top of the top. Of those top 100, we get 45 cards in this box. I'm expecting like 100 cards, right? Maybe even more. I'm expecting that, but we get 45. So we said, okay, let's be inclusive. Maybe we've got some reflectors here. So the 55 people who didn't bother, we're going to send them an email and find out if they want to give some considered thought and feedback. Of the 55 people we sent an email to afterwards, we got 3 emails back. So it's pretty conclusive. So in total, we have 48 people. And I went back to the CEO and I said, right, we've got 48 people. Could we now play a game? And the game is, we only invite these 48 to the next meeting. And I want to see if the 52 people who don't get invited get upset about it. If they get upset, we'll invite them. If they don't get upset, we'll leave them. Right, so we only invited the 48 people to the next meeting. And the invite didn't come from me. It came from their CEO. It says, dear John, I would like you to be at this meeting in 6 weeks' time. So we gave them enough time to prepare themselves. And the invite was beautiful because if you were a top 100 future leader of this company and you've got the CEO personally saying to you, I want you personally to help me on the bank's next 3 to 5 year ambitions. Like this is like the dream invite as a future top leader. Invite was sent to 48 people. We got 18 straight declines. No thanks. No, whatever. Justin Bieber, right? 18 people said, no, not interested. Of the 30 people who accepted the invite, we got 10 cancellations and we got a cancellation on the morning of the event. I'm thinking, how was that? He said he had a dentist appointment. I'm like, you're lying. There is no way you had a dentist appointment. So we got 19 people who showed up, right? And the CEO, he's like this, if you understand the UK a bit, like he's from Glasgow originally, but like Glasgow born and bred. And he's like this wonderful story from being from the lowest sort of job in the bank to now being the CEO. It's an amazing personal journey, but quite an aggressive guy. So he walks in, he says, where is everybody? And he swears sometimes too, but I won't swear because it's all on here. And then when we go into the room and we said, look, these are the 19 people. And what we'd realized is that the 81, and this is something that we've conducted this experiment a few times, right? And it tends to be about the same number. You're going to get between 10 to 20% of the population maximum, I think, show up to something like this. And what we did with the 19 is we split those 19 up across 5 work streams, and we got them to sort of charge ahead and drive massive quick change. You know, in an organization of thousands of people, you can do a lot with 19 really fired up people. But what we'd realised is the 81 people who didn't show up, they're not underperformers. Now remember, they probably went to the best, they would have been to Oxford. They got the best grades at the best universities, and they're working in one of the best banks. These are high achieving human beings who've probably been reading before other kids at 2 years old or whatever, I don't know. They're high performing humans. But what it was is that we'd found a subset of the population who, for whatever reason, and I'm not a psychologist, so I can't explain that, but who tended to care a bit more than the average. And this is what we would suggest, right? You're going to have people in your organization who care more than the average. How do you identify them? And again, you can find all sorts of simple mechanisms to do it. And once you identify them, what can you learn and help others to learn from them as well? Area number 4, we talk about the customer. So we all serve somebody, whether this is serving an internal team or an external team, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. You know, if you're a hospital, you're dealing with patients. If you're a social housing organisation, you're dealing with residents. If you're a bank, you're dealing with customers and so on. We all serve someone. What we'd figured out also is that most organisations, I'm sure yours included, is awash with customer insight. If you trawl anything online from Glassdoor to Indeed to all these other sort of search feedback mechanisms and all of the customer reviews, there's often tons of insight about what the customer feels about your organisation. We'd realised in our research from the manager's point of view, remember, and all we're measuring is the manager's view, is that most managers have got a very strong view of what they think the organisation could do better. And this was mind-blowing for me, right? This was like, I'm a geek when it comes to this stuff, right? But we found that 85% of managers believe that the products or services of their company could be better. And the reason why I found this so mind-blowing was because I spent years listening to millions of employees' feedback through employee feedback mechanisms. The interesting thing when you go to most employee feedback mechanisms is, what do they ask you? They're asking you questions about the values, about communication, about the organisation, about the leadership team. Very few organisational surveys get to the pointy question of operationally, what could be done better? Product or service development improvement. It's very rare that most organisational surveys do that. The reason why we're so interested when we found out with the number was because managers are very clearly telling us they've got very clear ideas and views on what could be better. And who's actually listening to those managers? Largely not many people, like no one actually in the larger organisations, which I think is like, A, it's a massive waste. It's quite disengaging for managers, and it's a waste of an opportunity. So often there is some really good stuff here to find out about what the managers feel about product or service development improvement. And again, if you're not already doing this, then I think this is a great opportunity to do that too. And then the final one, before a quick case study, before we finish, is about what I would consider to be like, whether this is, you term this as the vision, the future, how the future of the organisation looks. And the reason why we've looked at this so much is because often we find like this to be quite, what's the word? It wouldn't be uncompelling, that's not a word, is it? But it's like deflating in a way when we talk to some CEOs. And obviously I'm not going to single out CEOs, but I'll single out one with a brief story about this guy. So we were talking about the future of the company. And I said to him, you know, what does it look like? What does the next 3 to 5 years look like in your company? And this is how he talks, right? So he looks at his shoes a lot when he talks to you, which is never a great start. And he sort of mumbles and he says, well, you know, if we could do market growth plus 2%, I think that would be very exciting for everyone. I'm bored. He looked bored. Everyone's bored. And you know, the point is that it does seem to be that there needs to be something that feels mildly exciting. And we call this a compelling vision. It compels you to want to be there. It compels you to feel excited about where we're going. Often, and this can be easy trap to fall into, especially when you've got aggressive external investors, or you've got funds investing in you, or venture capital companies where you are targeted heavily on delivering a number. We get that. That it can be easy to fall into the trap of believing that everybody else is excited by a number. There's very few human beings who tend to be excited. Even numerically driven individuals don't get that excited about the number. There always needs to be a story. I won't show you this slide, so we haven't got time. But so what we find out is when we look at the ability to excite people about what tomorrow looks like. We think that this is really, really important. And the way that you do it is we like to ask people a very simple questions. I'll share with you the stat, which is the shocking stat that we thought we found when we looked at this, is that only 28% of managers actually have a plan of developing themselves, which is quite low. This is interesting because a lot of CEOs would say to us, well, I never had a plan. I figured it out and got to the top. I said, well, good for you. But most people don't operate like that. And probably if you've got an organization that you want to deliver and grow, I would suspect you want as many people as possible. Probably to have a plan would be a good idea of how they're going to develop that. And the one question that we zero in on, and this is a question that, again, you might want to test out with some of your teams. And the question is, what do you want to be famous for? And this is an individual question. What do you want to be famous for? And that could be within the team. That could be within the organization, that could be within your entire industry, could be globally, depends how ambitious you might want to be around that. But what do you want to be famous for? And often for most people, it's usually within my immediate circle, because that's where my status is built and that's where my reputation is built. So if you took most employees of any company, CEOs included, and put a sort of CEO webcam on and followed them for like 5 days around the office, you'd find out that the majority of people they interact with are largely the same type of people, right? The population of people that most people interact with is usually quite small. So if we can make an impact in that small group, often I feel really good about myself. So in that small group, what would I like them to feel about me, to think about me as an individual? And this is a really revealing question. So I've done this with my team. I do this on a regular basis. Actually, Dava will know one of the people in my team, but I asked her, and she lives in a place called Chester, which is in the northwest of England. And I said to her, where do you see it? So she says to me that she was born in Chester, she lives in Chester, she'll die in Chester. She loves Chester. It's a very nice place. They've got a zoo, they've got very nice things there. And the reason why I'm saying this is because when I sat with her and had these one-to-one conversations, right, they're quite quick. So where do you see yourself in a few years? In Chester. Doing what? Chester stuff, I don't know. But a one-to-one was very simple with her. And what I'd realized when I had this conversation about what you want to be famous for is she doesn't have a specific ambition, right? And actually all I'm doing every few months, because I think this is a good thing. Wayne thinks it's a good idea to sit there and talk about your dreams. But actually what am I doing every 3 to 6 months with her? I'm just making her feel inadequate and I'm making her feel bad. She does an exceptional job of doing what she does, right? And I hope she'd never ever leave working with us. But all I'm doing is making her feel bad about herself. She doesn't have an ambition, and that's totally cool. But then I realized when I asked the question of other people in the team, they were way more ambitious than I even realized. And now I'm nervous because I'm thinking if I don't deliver for them, I'm going to lose that individual. But asking this question, what do you want to be famous for me, I found this so revealing each individual to have these conversations. And then as a result of those conversations with some people, I thought, well, you know what? I don't need to check in with you regularly. You're good. For other people, I want to sit with you and develop a plan because you want to get somewhere. And actually that became a real thing that we use in our organization too. And then finally, before I close, and hopefully maybe we'd have a chance for a question or two for lunch, is an exemplar. So of all of the organizations that we've had the opportunity to work with, and I've now personally worked with about 1,000 different CEOs. So if you imagine like the CEO spectrum of 1,000 CEOs, from the sort of deeply empathic, want to hug you all day type CEO to like the clinical psychopath type CEO who wants to hide in the bush outside your house type CEO. I'm not saying that's rare, very rare. But, across that whole spectrum, and what we'd learned about a lot was, what do the great ones really do? So the same with organizations. We've come across some really brilliant companies. And there was an organization, well, there is an organization, it's a live, unfolding, constant story that I wanted to share with you. The organization is called Red Carnation Hotels. So Red Carnation have 20 hotels around the world. Has anyone stayed at a Red Carnation Hotel before? Oh, that's good. Hopefully you weren't going to say it was rubbish. Then it's ruined my whole story. But it was amazing. Oh, cool. Very cool. So Red Carnation have got 20 hotels, UK, Switzerland, South Africa, and the US, and also in Ireland. The reason why they came to my attention a number of years ago was because when we were measuring and giving out these awards for all these best companies, every year I stand on stage at this award show and I give awards to the usual suspects. It's Goldman Sachs, it's KPMG, it's PwC, it's all these good companies. They pay well, decent employment. Of course, they're going to be good employers, right? And then up pops a hotelier. And the reason why I was so fascinated by this particular company was because the hotelier, so what do you think the average salary is? So UK pounds, what do you think the average salary of Goldman Sachs is? Does anyone know anyone who works at Goldman Sachs? So average salary Goldman Sachs UK, what do you think? Rough number. Average. We're all going to leave and go there now. It's £300,000. So average salary, £300,000. So not bad, not bad. Emma's like, yeah, that's what a CEO would say. But £300,000. And then if we looked at the average salary for the hotelier, it was £30,000. And this company, the hotelier, had a higher employee feedback score than Goldman Sachs. So I was like, I'd never seen this before. I was totally blown away by the data. Now, if you think of the job of working in a hotel, if you've ever worked in a hotel, you're going to be working for 10 to 12 hours a day. You're going to be cleaning toilets and bedrooms. You're going to be, if you work at the hotel that they've got in Mayfair or in Kensington, then you're probably not going to be living anywhere near Mayfair if you're earning the minimum wage in London, for sure. You're probably going to be doing 2 jobs, maybe 3 jobs, if you're earning the minimum wage. And then with all of those conditions, this company has the best employee engagement score of any company we could find in the UK. So I was like blown away by it. So that's the employee feedback side. Now, if you're a believer that if you get great, happy employees who are engaged, you're going to have really happy customers who are engaged, then this again is the best example I think we've ever found. So we then looked at TripAdvisor. So TripAdvisor in London, there are 1,081 hotels listed on TripAdvisor in London. Red Carnation have 5 hotels in London, and they have the number 1, number 2, and number 3 hotels listed on TripAdvisor. It's essentially impossible, right? It's impossible to achieve this level of performance. If you're into something like Six Sigma, where you look at, defects parts per million, you're talking about service delivery, which has defect parts per million, equivalent to something like a Six Sigma. And the reason why I say this is because in order to achieve the number 1 position on TripAdvisor, you need something like 3 months of continuous 5-star ratings from every single guest. So imagine in your companies, or imagine your organizations, everything you did for 3 months, everyone you interacted with just said you couldn't have done anything better. And you're like, well, that's us, obviously. This is really hard to achieve, especially in this environment. So as a final quick thing, 2 things that we found out there, which I think are of value, which sort of, again, support much of what we found in our also research too. The first one is the recruitment process. Right, so when they find somebody for the organization, they do it in a way which we were blown away by. So I'm going to pick somebody. So what's your name? Christina. So if Christina's going to be my manager, so you don't have to do anything, right? So I'm going to come for my interview with Christina. And what she's going to do is ask me a couple of questions. And what she would say is if I fail on the second question, then the interview is over. We're done in 5 minutes. So they did this with me as a sort of mock-up. Even though I know it's like a mock-up test, I'm still nervous. So I sit with one of their general managers, actually the Milestone Hotel in Kensington, the guy who runs this one. I sat with him and we had this conversation. And then he said the first question, which was related to their purpose. So if we think back to what I was describing with strategy, why they exist as a company, the purpose is to create memorable experiences for their guests. Right, so he's like, you got it? I'm like, got it. Christina's like, you got it? I'm like, I got it. Memorable experiences for guests. Okay, right, first question, Wayne. Have you ever had a memorable experience? If so, tell me about it. So I'd say to my manager, potential manager, well, this happened, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and then the second question, the big one, the one at which they would say to you, right, you are out of here in 5 minutes if you don't like the answer to this question. The question is, have you ever created a memorable experience for somebody? It's a genius question. Have you ever created a memorable experience for somebody? If imagine now, let's switch roles. Christina is in, let's say you're in LA, you fueled up your private jet, you're going to fly to London and you're going to spend £1,500 per night to stay at the Egerton House in Kensington, which doesn't include breakfast, by the way, but you get free Wi-Fi. So you're going to spend probably £2,000 a night. And before you came to this hotel and you're prepared to spend that much money, you're going to look at some reviews. And we know that by the time you arrive at this type of hotel, as if you stay also anywhere nice, your expectations are irrational now. So you know that you're going to stay in like the best hotel in London. And as we'd found out, people would say to us that they feel like when they arrive there, they're going to be like held in like a loving embrace and like fed grapes by the manager of the hotel for 3 days. So when you arrive there, it's quite irrational. So imagine now you've selected me, Christina as my line manager, selected me as a room cleaner. I'm going to play the most junior job to interact with somebody. And I get asked the question, Wayne, have you ever created a memorable experience for somebody? And imagine I'm sitting there and I say, ooh, Oh, I don't know. Oh, no. Right, you're out of here, Wayne. Leave. Because we know that this is probably the most predictable behavior that drives the very thing that you want as an organization, which is at the end of the stay, let's say Casina's now flown in from LA, spent £2,000 a night. When she goes to check out the hotel, she tells everybody she knows and everybody she doesn't on a public forum that they should go and stay at this particular hotel. And we know the input to that is to have the employees not necessarily trained, but selected on the basis that they're the right type of person based on a particular type of behavior. And the reason why I say this is because nearly every organization we go into, and this is typical for me, right? So it might not be me anymore, but some of the team, is that they used to say to me, Wayne, you see those people over there, Wayne, those 50? I'd say, yeah, I see them. Yeah, they're bad people. We need to retrain these people. These are bad people. We reprogram them. And he said, but on what basis were they selected to be a manager? Like typical. Well, I got selected for a sales manager because I sold more than John. I didn't want to be a manager, but it's the only way they can justify giving me more pay. So I'm going to be a manager of a team. So again, what these guys do so beautifully is they've become, as I like to sort of determine it, is they've become consciously aware of the very thing that drives their overall success, and they look for that in the first interview. So the reason why Goldman Sachs, and again, people have their arguments on Goldman Sachs will have a 15 to 20 interview process to get into Goldman Sachs. 15 to 20 interviews, because they, again, put a lot of effort. I think they do in a more complex way, or Red Carnation do in a very simple way, which is to search for that very thing. And I sort of like it. Imagine you went on a date with somebody 15 times. You know if this is going to work or not, right? Well, hopefully by that point anyway. But again, the process of selection is really exceptional, which is why they focus so much on that. So when it comes back to what we call building leadership and management capability rapidly and at scale, I think there are consistent things, as I hope I've shared with you, that you can probably replicate and do super easy. Not much of this requires much time either, and it's something that you can scale rapidly. My final ask would be, again, that you try and think of people in your organization who are already getting this right and learn from what they're doing and help others maybe to learn from them. I'll stop there, and then hopefully we have a few moments for some questions, but thank you so much.